So that's my bio. I'm going to leave the slides. They'll be available after. I'm not going to go all into this because it's a lot. Essentially, I'm founder and CEO of Advanced Tech Media, and we talk to people creating the tech of tomorrow and also the industry of tomorrow. So innovators, disruptors, you name it. There's a number of other things that I do. So let's get right into it. Big data refers to data sets that are large or complex and predictive and behavioral analytics that extract value from data. So big data was a term that came about in the 90s. And let's see. It actually was on a business presentation, so just didn't really come from anything other, and then it became a term that really stuck. So it's now something that we heard a lot about, but we didn't really hear any projects in the space. And now it's a pervasive thing. And I'll get into that as we go on in the next few slides. Sorry. So as we know it, big data helps inform decisions and empowers companies to create a better user experience for the end user, right? Not necessarily. So the first problem that we have is machine learning and bias. So in the field of artificial intelligence, we've got machine learning, which is essentially, you've got two different things. You've got narrow AI and general AI. Narrow AI would be something like AlphaGo, and essentially it is a system that through repetition perfects a task. General intelligence is something that Nick will not want me to get into, but it's quite controversial. It's essentially a thinking machine, if you will, or a machine that is able to be sentient in some way. You can also think of it as a machine that is able to learn a novel task from something else. So somebody who's a machine who's able to abstract. So getting back to machine learning amplifies bias, and that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because a lot of the deep learning algorithms are based on data sets that are biased. Now, what happens is data sets are used in making decisions. So these are life-impacting decisions. Hiring, they're used in the criminal justice system, loan adjudication. You often see incorrect labels time and time again applied based on gender and skin color, and I'll give you two examples. So there is a program called Compass, and it looked at recidivism rates. And essentially, if you were black, you were determined more likely to offend. If you were white, less likely. There's another thing called predpol, which is basically neighborhood bias. So if you were from a neighborhood that was perhaps lower in economic value than a higher economic value neighborhood, then there'd be a whole lot more crime happening in your neighborhood, and police response would be much faster, or would be more prevalent, but not necessarily much faster. Now, so who benefits? Definitely not you, and that's the problem. We've all heard about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, but I don't know if you actually know the timeline, so I'm going to get into that a little bit. And this is just the beginning, and it goes back to 2010. So when I did research for this, Facebook created a thing called Open Graph, which is essentially your timeline in the Facebook program. So that essentially gave third-party access to user data. So you remember all of those games we used to play, and you get high score, and you could connect with your friends, and it was really cool. Not so cool, turns out. So this third-party access to user data, there's another piece to this. Cambridge Analytica, a researcher by the name of Alexandra Kogan, who had a company, Global Science Research, created an app called This Is Your Digital Life in 2013. And what that did is it accessed all of the user data that was available, that Facebook had made available since 2010. So if you were playing an online game on Facebook, your data was probably in this, which is a huge issue. Now, in 2014, Facebook limited access to data, but not retroactively. So again, a huge issue. There are links to decisions, personal data being used, and not necessarily personal data, but sorry. The problematic part about this data is that it had psychological testing methodology behind the data. So you would go through and answer quizzes, and some of this data would be used to create a personal profile for you. This data was then used by all sorts of people, Cambridge Analytica customers. Apparently in 2015, Ted Cruz, 2016, Trump. They allegedly used this data for their advantage. And it was reported that 57 million profiles. It was actually 87 million. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So the other problem is that privacy and data security are afterthoughts. The reported breaches, so in my slides, I have a Wikipedia page that has a list of all the reported breaches, and it's very long. Some of the more famous ones you've heard of would be Equifax. And again, this was something that they had known months prior, before it was even news, which is a huge issue. I was at a conference on November 30th, and I heard that I was at a hotel at the park, and I had heard that the Marriott database was breached. So all the data, for not all of the data, but a lot of the guest data was compromised. You've heard of Ashley Madison. That's probably one of the most famous ones, and there are many, 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 many others. The next issue. That episode of Black Mirror, which is Nosedive, it's true. So we've heard of the China social credit system, and this is scary. What's the scariest thing about this, again, when I was doing research, is that it's popular in China. So if you are privileged, if you're wealthy, if your social score is high, you benefit, and you're pretty happy that this exists. It involves systemic censorship, and it really creates the haves and the have-nots, and not only creates, but really entrenches. And one bad decision can make a lifetime of difference, which is really unfortunate because as human beings, we're neither black nor white. There's a spectrum as far as our behavior, if you will. And not being able to recover, that's pretty damaging to human beings. So in computing, there's a thing called DDoS, which is distributed denial of service attack. So I liken this to PDoS, personal denial of service attack by these systems. And that's the scary part. Your refrigerator is listening. Internet of Things. Sounds great, doesn't it? So the Internet of Things, they are connected devices estimated at, as of 2015, 15 billion. They estimate by 2020 that we'll have, it'll roughly double. There'll be 34 connected devices, and it'll be a $6 trillion market. Those are pretty big stakes. So the price of convenience is that these things are always on. And that's a problem, because if something's always on, if you're always able to access it, if you're always connected, I mean, it sounds great. You mentioned that you're out of eggs, and all of a sudden an egg order is made to your Amazon list and it's delivered to your home, which is pretty cool. But what else is happening? Who else is listening? How else is that data being utilized? So there's a really interesting article that I linked to. There's two things, actually. So the Federal Trade Commission in 2016 found that third parties collect data from devices. So some of these data points are device IDs, location data, demographic information, and search histories. Why does somebody want your search history? That should scare you. That should make you pause. So this really interesting article looked at three things. They asked essentially, are you listening to me? And they asked Alexa. The response was, I only send audio back to Amazon when you activate me. For more information, go to the privacy page. Okay, Google. Google essentially said the same thing. And then when Siri was asked, she said, nope. There you go. So, I don't know. I mean, something that's always on should concern you, because if it's convenient, there's probably a cost. That's it. If you have questions or feedback, come find me. Thanks.